so welcome to Remixing 3D Models with Meshmixer. So I'm Sam, and this is our agenda. So it is pretty basic the way it looks here, but like I said, we're gonna probably tailor this towards the audience in a particular way. So we'll just cover who I am, a little bit of my background, a little bit of my credentials, and then we'll jump into Meshmixer. It seems like most people kind of know what it is, but I'll generally talk about it. And then we'll jump into the program with kind of more or less its top uses, which I kind of have deemed repairing and remixing like in a particular way. So, and there's a lot you can do within both of those types of things. And I'll show a lot of different ways things can happen through some demos. And then after that, we're gonna kind of just hit a little Q&A if anybody has any questions, and just kind of showcase my portfolio, where you can find it, if you need to reach me for anything, email information, stuff like that. So let's get to it. Who is Sam? It's me. So ultimately, I'm a maker. I'm an artist, traditional artist as well as digital entrepreneur. At one point, I started a 3D printing company. So this class is more relevant to that than any of the other ones I've taught so far. But ultimately, I had a kiosk in a mall for a while, and I also did prototyping for people. And now I'm doing the instructor thing and the education piece. So basically, a lot of my education stemmed from here in Minnesota. I also went to ITT Tech in Eden Prairie, learned some design skills there, but then moved to Seattle, Washington, and continued my education and got my bachelor's degree in 2012. So in between the time, I worked for Microsoft. I acquired a 3D printer. I started to learn how to teach people within Microsoft. So Microsoft stores had a community piece to them that allowed you to learn as the public for free. Like almost everything they did was free. And you'd be able to engage with new technology, new software, digital stuff, stuff on the computer. So that's kind of where my background roots. And yeah, I've been doing this stuff for a while. So let's get started. So the basics, just kind of what is Meshmixer is kind of what I want to highlight. So it is definitely more like a Swiss Army knife than anything. It has multiple uses. It can, like I said, repair. It can remix. It can mesh things together. You can sculpt. You can create different cool patterns into models. You can do a lot. So we'll definitely talk about some uses. We'll hit on some of the highlights or the key things that at least I use Meshmixer for. But yeah, so just before we get started, just to kind of highlight some different things, because we're not going to cover all these things, but just to showcase what they look like, I like to kind of, sometimes I'll pull the images into the presentation, but this time I just kind of did a little Google search just so we can look quickly at what could be possible. And a lot of this stuff, just as an overview, we're seeing things being meshed together from like a rabbit and like some type of bird, an ostrich or something like that. Also adding supports for different types of 3D printing. So this definitely is a program that you use in tandem almost with a 3D printer. So this is like a pre-prep or pre-production piece to before you get to the slicing software within the 3D printing process. But it gives you kind of an overview that it does a lot of different things. It can do patterns. It can do just adjusting the model like in a particular way, adding more detail if you needed that. Let's say you 3D scan something in and some of the detail was lost because it couldn't see all the detail. You could pretty much enhance it or bring it back in a certain way if you took enough time or spent the time to do so. You can even remove pieces or parts of models. So we'll go through a lot of different things that are related to this. If you're new to Meshmixer, whoever watches this video, ultimately, this is a good place to start. Just kind of look at any program. I mean, search it and see what it's capable of in a visual way. That's always a good way to kind of get started so you're not intimidated on what you do in the blank area, which is like almost all programs. You start from a blank nothing, but this kind of shows you the result. So let's get started. And also, just really quick, here is Meshmixer's website. If you had not downloaded the program, just go to meshmixer.com. It is for Mac or PC. It has not been updated in a while. This program is not necessarily dead, but it definitely isn't in an active mode anymore. But just know that it is still available to download. So that's a good thing. At 2020, this program has not been updated in a while, in a couple years. So it is a strong tool. I think Autodesk as a company knows that, so they keep it around for us. So let's jump into the actual program now and get started. So I'm going to take off my camera here. I don't think we need that at this point, but ultimately I will, whoops, excuse me, drive the presentation just through my voice here until I need to see my voice or see my face again. So when we get started with Meshmixer, usually we're going to import. There are a few kind of default shapes that are in Meshmixer: a plane, a sphere, and a bunny. There's good examples that you can show with these. I have my own examples that I'm going to pull in. So I'm going to find my model. So in this case, you already usually have a intent or a model in mind. You know what you're going to do with it. Meshmixer, like I said, we're going to show in the first portion of this pretty much a demo of repairing and a few different ways to repair, a few different ways to know if the model is one piece or multiple pieces or things like that. So I have a scan that I did a few years back, and it was of almost like a knickknack, but it was like an ashtray of like an elephant, almost like an African looking sculpture type of deal. So once it loads here, we'll see kind of what it looks like. Alrighty, so it's on its side. This was a scan from photogrammetry. So basically, it was a bunch of photos taken around the object and then processed through a particular program and then saving out the mesh at its state where we see it right here. So from here, this would be like stage 2, where we did the scan and now we need to clean it up before we could even start to 3D print this, which we probably could 3D print this, but it wouldn't look good. There's no good base on the bottom portion here where it can rest on the actual printer. Also the size is probably not right, so we can fix a lot of those things here in Meshmixer. So first thing I would do is probably orient this thing in a more normal orientation, something that would be sitting like on a surface. So the grids down here are models up here. Quick way to put the model onto the bed is going into Edit, Align, and then automatically it wants to align it to the world. We're going to push Accept. And then now it's on the grid. So that's kind of just a quick way to move models that, let's say you found them on the Thingiverse, which is a database of 3D models, or My Mini Factory, or any places you can find models. Most cases, their origin might be somewhere else. So you want to put them onto the grid sometimes just to kind of make it easier for yourself. Next thing, under Edit, we're still under Edit. I'm going to click on Transform and then rotate this thing 90 degrees. So it was exactly 90 degrees in a different orientation from the scanning program or from the way that it was constructed in the scanning software. I just needed to rotate it to the right orientation for this program. So that makes it also easier just to understand your model, just so you can look at it in the right way, not upside down and flipped over. So once I do that 90-degree turn, which was this red kind of curved bar here, turned it 90 degrees, and I can push Accept. So a lot of these basic things you might not have to do depending on the model. It just depends on what you're bringing into the program. So next thing I would probably do is just check to see if it contained any pieces in the inside. So I would make sure I would separate the shells. So kind of on this edit list here too, there is separate shells. If I click on that button, it'll think. And then in this case, it needed to pop up the object browser so we could see that there was actually 2 additional pieces that were just I would call artifacts from the scan. So there could have been a whole lot more than this, but this one actually turned out pretty decent from where I left it off. So the main model, when you click on it, is this lighter gray. When you select the object and you can see it, it's a lighter gray. If you're not selecting it, it's usually darker gray. So in this case, these are some internal pieces we can't even see. I'm just going to hold shift and select both of them and push delete. So we're just taking out extra data that is not needed. If you bring in, say, a model from Thingiverse, there's a lot of times where people will model things in a lot of obscure ways, I would say. Not always a bad thing. Sometimes programs can be really efficient, but they don't always clean up the model in the right way. You can bring it in here and do moves like this, just to make sure it's all one piece or not. And next, let's say we needed to clean up. So there's a hole at the bottom of this. Probably don't want that. So now we need to do a selection. We're going to take out this piece, and then we're going to probably have to repair it a little bit with some sculpting tools. So basically, the first step here is up on this main toolbar. So at first we were on edit. Now we're actually going to go to select. Select can work in a couple different ways. If you look at the top here, it's a brush or a lasso. I'm going to stick with the brush just so I can brush in and highlight that area that I want to fix. And what I might need to do is actually click on view here, and I'm going to turn off show grid just so I can go underneath the model. Oh, for whatever reason, sorry. I'm going to turn this other thing off to show print bed. Meshmixer has a few different view options where you can see the size of a 3D printer that you're working with, so you can kind of understand the volume as you scale things up, or different visual tools. But I turned all those things off under view just so I could get underneath the model and actually see what's going on here, how much I've selected. And if you mess up on your selection, you can always clear the selection at the bottom, the big gray button at the bottom. But in my case, I want to probably select from this way just so I don't accidentally select the ears or the things that pass through the model. So that's always a thing to be thinking about, not only in this tool, but in others too. So we'll select that hole. And then now that we've selected it, if we look up here on the panel that we were originally using, it has changed a little bit. And now we see some other things we can do. And under edit, within the selection tool, we are able to, what I found to do that works the best is to discard this area and then remesh the entire thing. So let's discard it. And now there's a kind of weird hole that's inside of it. And you can see that if you ever see this red looking internal, like I guess pattern, that means you're seeing the flip side of the model. You're seeing technically the backside within the model, which is usually, if this is left unchecked, this won't print correctly, or in most programs, it'll give some type of error. So usually we need to close this up and make the model what's called manifold, or meaning that it's fully closed, it's watertight, it doesn't have stuff like this going on. So the way to fix this easily, and it will kind of leave a weird spot here, but we're going to fix that. And then I purposely am doing it this way to show this particular demo. So we're going to fix this in a particular way through the edit tool. And then on this list, there is a magical tool called the Make Solid tool. When you click on that, it will fill holes, it will close boundaries, it will, in a sense, repair the mesh's shell. It will actually restructure an entirely new model by almost like scanning over the mesh that it sees. So, and it saw that there was a hole there and it filled that in. Even though it didn't fill it in cleanly or kind of at the same level, we can use tools that are sculpting tools to fix that. And even down here, it's not perfectly rounded with the way the bottom was. we're going to do something else to make that flat anyway. So there's going to be a couple tools next that we'll use to fix these things. Even this little bulge here on the inner face of this kind of like ashtray thing. Well, before we click accept on this, right now we're just looking at a preview. So there are a few different solid types that you can switch to. Fast is going to just be quick and dirty. It's going to get across the surface, it's going to do it quick. It's not going to use a ton of polygons to actually create this. You may lose some detail, and by may, more than likely you are. So if you want to preserve detail, you want to go either accurate or sharp edge preserve. Accurate is the one I found to be kind of a compromise in the middle. Turning up the solid accuracy is going to make it look harder at the model before it recreates the mesh. Or the mesh density is going to throw more polygons at the model to try to articulate the shape better. So in most cases, if you wanted to match closer to what you had originally, you want to crank up both of these particular settings. So you would just test it out. So when you click on update, it's going to, in a sense, reprocess that model and show you a new preview. Depending on your processing power in your computer, this can take a while, depending on the complexity of the model. So this one wasn't too crazy. My computer's decently fast, I guess. It's a desktop computer, not a laptop, so it can do more with its ability to process. But let's see what we get here. So that's a lot closer to what we originally started with. So those particular settings are the main driving forces of capturing the accuracy. Using accurate as a solid type is probably the main one I would use. But if you just want a quick rough tracing of it, fast is good enough. Blocky, I think we kind of could even imagine what that's going to do. It's going to be very low resolution, not probably what you want in most cases. But then sharp edge preserve is if you have some really hard surfaces, some really hard edges that you want to keep, those will stay sharp for you. This model was already a scan. The edges were already kind of softened. I'm not going to worry about those particular details, but I can tell that it did bring back the deepness and the bumps here. The surface, I would say quality has been resolved or been restored through those particular settings. So now that we're happy, if we're happy, we can push accept. And it's going to create a new model. So in the object browser, we're going to see another mesh show up. So the first one was the original, which now has been turned off with the eyeball. Hide and show. So if you do need to ever see it, again, you can turn it on and off. It's still there. The main one we're going to work with now is this one. So now that we have that set up, we can kind of start to maybe fix the model. I could have even fixed the model maybe even in the prior step and then remeshed it. Doesn't really matter. The remeshing can basically, let's say you modeled it in a program like Blender or a program where you can actually do some different types of modeling like box modeling or the different techniques that are out there for modeling. Sometimes the polygons will be stretched in weird ways. They'll not be uniform. Sometimes that matters, sometimes it doesn't. But for sculpting, it kind of does matter. You want an even count of polygons to be in the area which you're going to try to manipulate. Otherwise, it's going to warp and do some weird things. So the remeshing, that tool that we just used, Make Solid, is going to give you an even distribution of polygons across the entire mesh. That sometimes can be very important. So next, let's go into Sculpt. So on that list, we were going from Edit, we went to Select, now we're on Sculpt. Sculpt is going to also have two different brush types. So you can either do volumetric, which is more of a sphere type brush, or you can do a surface brush, which is just like a 2D plane that's gliding across the surface. It doesn't penetrate the surface the way that the volumetric brush does. So depends on what you're trying to do. In this case, I'll leave it on the volumetric. If I feel like it's not doing what I want, I'll switch over. But what I want to really do is just bring this hump down. And then I also want to push this bubble in. So let's do the bubble first. That's going to be the easiest one. So shrink smooth. And there's a few different smoothing options. There is bubble smooth, which is going to pull a concave like surface out and push it back to the surface. It's going to pull it out and not manipulate too much of the outer area around it. And then the opposite is for the shrink smooth. So a bubble, a wart, or something that's popping out of the surface, you want to push that back in. Shrink smooth is going to be the one. So before we even use the tool, just as we look at the different properties and attributes we can change, you have fall off. Fall off is going to be the shape of the tool, how it manipulates. Is it a sharp point? Is it a curved, rounded point? Is it a flat, plateaued point? Some of those different adjustments may be needed to clean up what you're doing, or just to sculpt and add details. So the way we're using the sculpting tools is for repairing, but you could use the sculpting tools for like cosmetic reasons and adding details and things like that. And in this case, it is cosmetic. We're just doing surgery, if you will. So if we simply just click on the mesh now, so we have shrink smooth. The strength is on 50, or basically halfway to its full ability. Right now, it's not doing enough for us to push it in. On this one, it just isn't enough strength. So turning up that strength, shrinking the brush, the size is here on the properties panel, but with your keyboard, if you're a shortcut person, it's good to know some shortcuts. The brackets on your keyboard, your left bracket is going to shrink, your right bracket is going to grow the brush size. So now that we've shrunk the brush size a bit, and the surface already kind of has some kind of pitted regions to it, but we have effectively pushed that in closer to the surface where we need it to be. If for some reason these smooth tools aren't effective enough pushing things back down, because this is not exactly a bubble, it's like something else, we might need to use other tools. So there's different ones. So under the brushes, move might be the one we need. Because move is going to actually grab the surface, and then you physically, I guess with the mouse, you pull it down. You grab with your brush size and you pull it down. So that's not exactly the size we need to do this properly. So I'm going to make this bigger. Maybe I want to switch it to surface. Whoops. I guess you click on the actual word, not slide the slider. And then there are different tools here, I guess now for the surface one, but let's see if draw is similar. It kind of pulls the surface too. It doesn't do it as aggressive as move, but now we can see that it's sliding across the surface. We see this circular kind of tool, and there's like a red point in the middle. We see it almost articulating itself across the surface. So we know that that's what it's going to do when we use it, but we need to do it in a subtractive way. So right now it's adding if we just left click and drag. So we need to hold shift. Let me decrease the size a little bit here. Or maybe it's control, excuse me. Control does it. And with this kind of weird artifact, it may take a little bit of finessing to get this right. And I'll move around just to kind of see what's going on here. So I didn't talk about navigation in the beginning, but just quickly, if you're new to 3D programs and you just jumped into this video, just quick navigation on this program. Right click, mouse, and drag is your rotate. Middle mouse wheel is your zoom. And then left click is your click or your selection or activating a tool button. But mainly it's just your middle mouse wheel and your right click drag. And then if you ever want to pan the screen, it's your middle mouse button, pull down to move up, push forward to move down, left is right, right is left. You'll get used to that. But now that we kind of have pushed that in, we just need to smooth this out maybe a bit more. So I'm going to close this browser here and probably just use robust smooth here. Crank up the strength. And for 3D printing purposes, that might be enough. You know what I'm saying? Like you fix the bump in there, it's back to surface level, more or less. Obviously, what we're seeing with how smooth it looks, I went through the wall. It looks super smooth here because it's showing us the, how should I put it? If I push W, we can see the wireframe. The wireframe can help us understand the topology better than the way that the shader shows us the way it looks in the light. So I can tell now that I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty close. I've gotten it down to the floor and I've gotten it close to the wall. And I've gotten it in an area where that looks good enough for my purposes. If I needed to tighten that up anymore, I would use the appropriate tools, the right brush sizes to get in there even more. So basically now I think the last thing, if I ever want to turn that wireframe back off, it's just W on your keyboard. If I needed to clean anything else up, I could do so now. So I'm just still on the surface brush. Maybe just smooth out weird little spots that just didn't seem like they were right. And then now I'm going to cut that bottom bubble off of the object here. So next step here is just to go to our edit tool or edit toolbar and then plane cut. So close to the middle here, plane cut is going to be the tool we want to use to knock off the bottom. So when you activate the tool, you see a grid. You see kind of half your models ghosted out, half your models not. And then you see this little manipulator here, the transform tool. You want to move that down until you get to the area that you want to cut off or separate into two pieces. So this tool can be used in two different ways. One can be to remove or make a flat surface. Another can be to separate a model into multiple pieces for, let's say, a larger 3D print or something of that nature. All right. So I'm just going to bring it up basically right to the edge of the feet of the elephant here. And then up here on the options, cut type. So right now, by default, usually it's on cut, discard half, and the half that it's going to discard is the ghosted out area, the bottom. You could flip that over. So if you ever needed to say, oh, I want the other side of it, not this side, you can click on this arrow here, and it will flip it to the other side if that was ever needed. But we want this side, so I'll flip it back. If I did want to keep both, it can slice it, and then you would have to separate shells to get the two pieces. There are times where you need that. In this case, let's cut it. All right, so it cuts that extra mesh off. Sometimes it will create a new color for the face group that's created. Face groups are a special thing in this program that allow you to select in a special way. So you could actually select this green panel easily in this program, whereas other programs, you couldn't just select the bottom face easily unless it's a special type of modeling program. But this one has a special use for why it's green. I won't hover over that in this tutorial though. So I think at this point we've repaired this thing pretty effectively. And I could even go in and do some more cleanup if I wanted to with the brushes, but for all intents and purposes, let's say this is done. We brought it in, we flipped it over, we filled the hole in, we cleaned up a couple problem areas, we made it printable and flat at the bottom. So I think this is like an effective model that we could say this is print ready. So next we would just click on File, Export, and then I'm just going to save it to my desktop just for this example. Call it what we need to. Elephant print ready. Maybe you're saving it in the same folder and you have the original one in there to make it easy for yourself to know what's up. Naming convention is an important thing in the computer, even if it's basic, just have some rhyme and reason to how you name things. Alrighty, so now we would go into our slicing software and then we would print that thing out, which is a completely different thing from this video, but we would go there. So let's go to something else. Next time, let's remix a model now. So we're going to import, and what it's asking us here is, do you want to replace it or add it to the file or add it to the scene? We're going to replace. There are times where you want to bring in other models and bring them together, and that's what we're actually going to show here in a second. So let's replace it now with this deer model I found from the Thingiverse. So that last mesh, I actually did scan it myself. This one, I just found the model. Somebody sculpted this. There's no way they did a 3D scan of some deer like in the wild, like standing there looking majestic. That'd be impressive to say the least. You have some time stopping powers or something. But what we want to do, and we're going to do with this one, is something kind of freaky, but kind of cool in the respect of what the program is capable of. I'm going to cut off this deer's upper part of its body and replace it with the David statue, which I have to bring in an import way. So first thing I'm going to do is just kind of get this thing ready. I might actually even cut off the second deer and just keep it kind of like as a solo piece here, so it doesn't look too weird. And I'm going to use some selection tools to do that. So kind of as we did before, let's select, and I will just kind of cut across here. And I could actually do this lasso thing and just drag a line around. I kind of missed a little bit. Let's do that one more time. So just start dragging a line around what you want to cut. And it'll cut all the way through the surface this way too, not just on the top. Or it will select in that way. Ooh, and it's cutting a little bit more than we want because the mesh is weird. This is what I was kind of talking about before. So let's clear the selection. Let me just show you this really quick. Push W. It's very high detailed and dense up here. And the mesh is kind of weird too. It's like got weird quads. Like they're just all kind of different shapes, triangles too, all kind of different uneven shapes, which down here is where it affects it the most. I can't select very well because it's so low polygon down here that it's going to select all of this stuff when I drag across it. So maybe before I even get started, it might be good to remesh this thing just so it's a little bit easier to manipulate right out of the gate. So we'll push W to turn off the wireframe, edit, make solid. We're definitely going to have to do some stuff about these horns because they were already pretty thin. So fast is not the one. Accurate. Let's turn up the solid accuracy again, pretty high, and then let's update it. Those horns should come back in a pretty decent way. If they don't, we'll have to adjust the settings a little bit more. Or we could resculpt the horns a little bit too. If they're mostly there, we could bring them back with some sculpting. But the horns, we don't need them. That's the thing. We don't need this upper part. We just need the legs. We need the body of this deer. So now that I just rethought about that, it doesn't matter up here. I'm cutting that off. And I'm cutting off this deer too. So let's say accept. It looks good enough for the body. Now let's go to select. Let's do that move we were just about to do. Sometimes the camera angle can matter when you're doing this type of selection. Awesome. So now we can see that it's going to cut it in a better way. And I could even give more land to the base right now by like deselecting a little bit of this. So I would hold shift and just undo some of this selection. Maybe a little bit of it down here. Awesome. And then actually I'm going to reselect the leg a little bit just so I can cut that away properly. So this is where, yeah, just rotating your camera view is going to give you the right angle to not select more. If you do select too much, hold shift, boom. So we've cleanly cut off that leg. We can repair that with the tools that we know about now. So let's cut this first, and then we'll cut the head off, and then we'll add David in and remesh this thing a few times to make it work. So next, let's edit. Let's discard. And then let's just go ahead and take off this headpiece that we don't want right now too. Oh. So I'm just gonna lasso around this. I wanna kind of cut that line right there is kind of where I think we wanna cut it. Because we're gonna replace it with a man's torso, like in this area. So it's gonna be like a minotaur, basically. So I think we can clean that up a little bit, resize the brush, hold shift. And I want it kind of just to be right at this neckline where you can tell where the muscles transition. Oh no. I messed up. It started to do that lasso selection right at the end of the last little piece that I was going to select. So it really isn't forgiving on that. You can't just like undo and reselect something. So if that ever happens to you, don't fret, just reselect. This time around, I just kind of did the brush approach and I'm just selecting it kind of by brushing the selection in. Okay, I think that is good. Let's go ahead and just discard that too. It looks like I had a little piece here that I missed. So I can go to edit and separate shells and just check to make sure if there's a bunch of extra little pieces, we can delete those before we remesh this. If you cut it and it just like for some reason you chopped a bunch of little pieces into the model, you can get those out of there pretty quick. So this piece up here, we'll delete that. And then now, let's edit and make solid again. So it's going to fill that hole and a couple little holes in here. And it usually does a pretty decent job. This is like the fast one, you know, and since we had already remeshed it, it already had decent geometry to go from. It didn't have to kind of, you don't have to ramp it up super high if you've already remeshed it before. But now that we've done this, and actually there's this like little black spot here. I'm not sure what that is. Let's just switch it to accurate just to give it a little bit higher poly count for when we mesh in the David statue, which I have that model already saved. So all I have to do is bring it in. So just play around with it just in case you need it to be higher resolution, you need it to look a little better. Who knows? Get it to where you think it should be, and then push accept. All right, so now let's click on import. So we have this set up. I could go in and sculpt and make the base look better. I could do all that stuff later. But just to show the main meat of this, I want to combine another piece into this. So let's import. This time we're going to append David statue. Let's open. And we're going to have to do some surgery on him first too. And it's saying that the file is kind of far away. Do you want to move it closer to the other ones? And usually you want to say yes. So here we can see that they are two different scales. We're going to have to shrink this thing down as well as cut a bunch of stuff off of them. And try to keep almost like his hand hanging down like that, but we're going to cut off the bottom part of his body. So let's start with just aligning him to the floor. So let me turn the grid back on so we can kind of see where we're at here. And the deer was already on the floor, luckily enough. The David statue is not. So let's click on Edit, Align. It's going to kind of move him over, but we'll move it again. And then Accept. And then now let's do Transform. And Transform is going to move your object, rotate it, and scale it. So your scale is your box shape here. And I'm going to scale him, if I hold Shift, or actually maybe it's not Shift, maybe it's Control. No, maybe it's Alt. Oh, it doesn't actually have a, I guess, a shrink like that. So sometimes there will be a shortcut key for doing like a proportional scale, and it'll do it from the direction that you're actually scaling from. In this case, we're going to have to just scale it the old traditional way and just use the white box in the middle to scale it in all directions. We want it to be a uniform scale or resizing. And then now I'll just position sometimes this can be tricky depending on you size it down quite a bit and now you're moving it across space that you really don't have perspective of. But we found it. We're here. And now we just need to get this about to the right scale at first, and I can start chopping stuff off now, but I think we see where this is going, y'all, as I'm putting this together. And there might be, since it's back in the way that the back of the deer work, might have to fill that in, might have to sculpt and do some things to kind of make that mesh the best way. But I'll try to keep as much meat as well, if I will, as I can to make this look right. All right. And then now I'm going to start chopping stuff off. I'm going to chop off, obviously, his bottom half here. So let's accept those transformations. That'll keep him where we just moved them. And then now I'm going to do the same old techniques we've been using. This is kind of the meat of the way I use this program, is chopping things off, remeshing, sculpting a little bit, fixing it in the way I want it to be. So I'm going to lasso, I think, kind of from here, cut that hand, keep the hand, and go around here. And for whatever reason, it did the opposite selection. Let's clear that. I'm going to turn the deer off just so we don't get confused here. Okay, let's try that again. Confusing. I'm not sure why it's flipping the selection like that, but I can always select it manually. Yeah, I'm not sure what was happening there. But either way it goes, this is going to be second option. Lasso should work. We saw it work a few times before. Just all of a sudden, this model just doesn't like that technique. So you just have to be careful when you're selecting and not to deselect. The lasso kind of gives you an efficient way to just quickly bounce around the object, as we saw before. Always, you can resize your brush, sweep across an area, a bigger area faster if you're not trying to be careful. And then for the last bit of this selection, just going to get the right angle here so I can keep as much of that hand as I can. And the way it was looking, it looked like it was going to rest up. Sorry about that, little notification. That looks like it's going to rest kind of on the deer, almost in a natural looking way. That was a happy accident. All right, so we've got them all selected here. Let's edit. Let's discard. And then let's edit again, separate shells. We'll delete any of those little artifacts. There was actually quite a few this time. So I'll select David. I know he's shell 1 on the list. I will shift select the rest of these and just delete them. They're just little artifact pieces that just got missed on the selection. And then after that, let's reselect David, click on edit, and there's actually, I guess, 2 ways this could be done. I could remesh him and then squeeze them together with the model and then mesh them both together. I think there might even be a way where I can just mesh him together with the model now. I just need to move him with transform. Might have to skinny him up a little bit. Sometimes warping it or scaling it in the other dimension could help you if you're doing something like this, like if you don't need to keep it perfectly proportioned the way it was. But I think we just need to make sure that his body is meshing with this ever so slightly, and it should be able to fix that when it does the remeshing. Because kind of what I wanted was this arm to be touching like that. Yeah, and combining things like this is never going to be perfect, but ultimately, I think there's going to be a way where we can clean up that seam. So let's do the combination now. I'm going to say accept that transformation. I just kind of tweaked it a little bit, rotated it, moved it. And then now let's select the 2 main pieces. And then we're going to click on combine. So combine is going to tell the computer that they're a grouped object, but they're not necessarily one object, as we can see here. If we were just to go separate shells, we could separate them back out into 2 objects. But now that they're kind of grouped, we can do that make solid, and it can bridge the gap here. It can fix different things. So we'll see how good of a job it does. Oh, my video. Is my video still there? Okay. Yeah, it blinked out on my monitor there for a second. Okay, we're still here. So back to a step that we know, but obviously fast is not enough accuracy. So let's crank up those settings again. I like to just get them into the 300s on both of them in most cases, just to give it enough ability to sculpt and all those other things we need to. All right. So it is got some weird funky geometry, but we can fix this. So let's say that that's where we want it. Let's click accept. And now we're gonna go through the process of repairing. So I'm gonna try to make this quick. We're getting close to the end. We got about 10 minutes left. So let's jump into sculpt. I'm actually gonna use the volume brushes this time. There we go. I guess maybe you do use the slider. And then first, we're gonna do some bubble smoothing on this edge here. Just gonna see how it tries to. And we might want to keep like, I guess like the where the muscle definition like the seam is between the muscles. Maybe that makes it look more accurate. Who knows? But obviously this needs to get brought out more. So maybe I'll just use move, make it a little bit bigger, grab this whole little area. Maybe bring this area in and think of it like digital clay. That's kind of where it starts to go here. And we'll switch angles here now. And this back transition is going to be kind of weird, but let's think of this as a bubble smooth too. So we need to bring this out. And if I ever feel like the effect of the tool isn't strong enough, strength, remember strength is the way, or if it's too strong, turn down the strength. So kind of right there, I mean, that was just a quick fix. Like it kind of made it work right out of the gate there. And I've done this before with like Spider-Man and a bull, but not necessarily David. So and the hand meshed up pretty good. All I'm gonna do is just do a little smoothing there to take out those weird spots on the hand. Depending on how big you 3D print this, these details might not even be seen in that way. It might just represent as a hand and you can tell that that's what it is. Awesome. That actually turned out pretty okay. I'm not gonna lie to you. I didn't even know where it was gonna go here towards the end, but it worked out. Awesome. And then after that, maybe you clean up the base or something like that, and or you could put Minotaur or something in letters or just something. I don't know how you would deal with the base per se off the top of my head right now, but if I were to play around with this enough, I would clean this up, maybe add a little bit more detail to the rocks, maybe even bring some rock shapes in and just throw them at the bottom and make it look more detailed than what it is naturally. Cut that stuff off the bottom and make a new base if I wanted to. Awesome. So same thing here. File, export. It's going to export the model that you have selected or the one that's currently highlighted the way that it is. And then we would go in and David Minotaur. I'm not even spelling that right. It doesn't even matter. Basically, you name it something you can remember. And then from here, yeah, you have that model now. You've meshed and remixed a thing, two completely different models into one. You can have plenty of fun with that. I think that's one of my favorite things to do in this program. Awesome. I don't think I have quite enough time to show this last demo. I'll probably save that for a different video. But I think kind of at this point, we're ready for like a little Q&A if there's any. Feel free to check out my, well, not Meshmixer, but basically those are things that are highlighted thingy websites. So one of them is Behance. I have a artist portfolio here. You can find different things that I've done. I have a lot of different creative skills. that I did. It's like a scan sculpture type of deal. But I use Meshmixer to cut planes flat and to manipulate these models so they could mesh together and do things like this and interlock in this way. So definitely the tool has a lot of artistic ability to it. It has a lot of functional utility. Last thing, I do have a 3D printing website as well, so you could check out. It's called 3D Build Tower, and at one point I prototyped for people, 3D design for people. You could see some different things that I've done. But yeah.